In the course of my life, following the typical path of a young gay man who moves to the city, builds up new social networks, and learns what it means to be gay by discovering the gay world that already exists, inventing himself as gay on the basis of that discovery, I had also followed another path, a class-based one. This is the itinerary of those who are frequently labeled class traitors. And surely a traitor or a renegade is what I was. One whose only concern, a more or less permanent and more or less conscious one, was to put as much distance as possible between himself and his class of origin, to escape from the social surroundings of his childhood and adolescence. Of course, I retained a political solidarity with the world of my early years, to the extent that I never came to share the values of the dominant class. I always felt awkward or incensed when hearing people around me talking scornfully or flippantly about working class people and their habits and ways of life. After all, that's where I came from. I would also experience an immediate hatred on encountering the hostility that well-to-do, well-established people would express towards strikes, political activism, protests, and forms of popular resistance. Certain class reflexes persist despite all our efforts to separate ourselves from our social origins, even those efforts aimed at personal transformations. And on those occasions in my daily life, rare but not non-existent, in which I gave way to hasty and disdainful opinions that characterize a view of the world and other people that we might as well call class racism, my reactions, nonetheless more often than not, resembled those of Paul Nizan's character, Antoine Bloyer. A portrait of Nizan's father, Bloyer is a former worker who has become bourgeois, and he still feels hurt by the derogatory remarks about the working class that he hears, made by those people around him who now constitute his social milieu. It feels as if he were being targeted along with the milieu to which he used to belong. How could he share their opinions without completely betraying his own childhood? Every time I would betray my own childhood by sharing in deprecatory opinions, inevitably a nagging bad conscience would make itself felt, if not sooner, then later.
Welcome everyone to the Balie and welcome to the Freedom Lecture. We have just listened to actress Meerte Labré, who read an excerpt from the book Returning to Reims, and she will come back later tonight for the second part. I'm really happy and very honored that we have a very special guest in our midst. It's Didier Eribon, the well-known and internationally praised philosopher, sociologist and writer. Welcome, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Tonight we will talk with him and with other guests about class, about identity, and about what freedom means in that regard. Before we begin, I want to thank VEFONS and Stichting Doen for making this evening possible. Before we are going to listen to Didier Eribon, I want to give the floor to writer Fien Veldman, recipient of the Joost Zwagerman Essay Prize for her essay Not Really Making It, about growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Leeuwarden. This year she published her debut novel Xerox, and she will give us a short introduction. Please give her a warm welcome.
In the spring of 2002, Valerie is crying in the schoolyard of the Menno van Coehoorn School in Leeuwarden. Valerie is the opposite of a soccer mom. She rarely visits her daughter's school. She wears leather trousers even though the sun is shining. The director of the school, Joop, is trying to understand what Valerie is saying. Her Dutch isn't very good. She's from Brazil and hasn't been in the Netherlands for long. After a while, Joop understands. Valerie's 12-year-old daughter, Barbara, who is in 8th grade, is missing. Barbara is a girl with shiny, deep red hair. When she smiles, you can see her gums. She always takes money to school, sometimes a stack of 2-euro coins rolled into paper, like shopkeepers use for their cash register. The Menno van Coehoorn School is a primary school located in the Vlietzone, a part of the city which also includes the Zeeheldenbuurt. A year earlier in this neighborhood, a major criminal case has been brought to light. 10 kids between the ages of 2 and 15 years old have been sexually abused and assaulted by 2 couples from the neighborhood. Almost all victims' families move away. The perpetrators are sentenced to 1.5 to 6 years in prison. In 2002, 9 of the 78 homes in the neighborhood are vacant. Somebody wrote, in big yellow letters, the word pedophile on one of the houses. At the time Barbara goes missing, the 8th grade is getting to know their 7th substitute teacher. This teacher, Meester Jaap, is popular because he lets his students do whatever they want, which is chatting online with strangers on the school computer. He himself also does whatever he wants. On that same school computer, in the hall of the school, visible for everyone who's passing by, together with a 10-year-old boy from 7th grade, he watches porn. He points at the naked women he finds the hottest. In the beginning of the school year, 8th grade is made up of 18 kids. At the end of the year, there are 15 students left. This year, Barbara is the 3rd girl not returning to class. The first 2 are Wendy and Priscilla. Wendy needs glasses to read the board, but she thinks glasses are ugly. She started smoking this year. Priscilla is shy and sometimes writes EVE on her arm, which stands for Eigen Volk Eerst, which is a white supremacist slogan. Wendy has been expelled a few weeks ago, and as a result, Priscilla also decides not to come to school anymore. There's also no reason. The attainment test, the CITO-toets, that will determine the level of secondary education for each student, has already taken place. I'm in this class, and I live in this neighborhood. The house with pedophile on it is on the corner of my street. A few weeks before Barbara has gone missing, the school director tries to explain the results of the attainment test. Most children in the class don't know the difference between the levels of secondary education. He holds up a form with the results. They are mine. On the basis of those results, I could go to grammar school, het gymnasium, which is the highest level of secondary education in the Netherlands. But I'm advised to go to the high school my friends will attend, so I won't feel out of place. Didier Eribon writes, in returning to Reims, I cannot help but see an infernal machine in the school system, given the way it functions right in front of our eyes. If it is not set up to attain this goal, it at least produces this objective result: rejecting the children of the working class, perpetuating and legitimating class domination, differential access to careers and to social positions. In 8th grade, every now and then, the boys in our class would start singing a song and eventually everyone would join in. Als u nu niet springt, als u nu niet springt, als u nu niet springt, ben je een homofiel. If you don't jump now, you're a homosexual. Translation mine. My classmates and I would jump up and down, of course, because nobody wanted to be gay. I have always thought that this attitude toward homosexuality had no effect on me. My grandmother and aunt, who are each other's best friends, have a homosexual friend from church whom they always refer to as our homosexual friend from church. So I don't know his actual name. Whenever they say the word homosexual, they are clearly very uncomfortable and they avoid looking at me. Another quote. The traces of what you were as a child, the manner in which you were socialized, persist even when the conditions in which you live as an adult have changed, even when you have worked so hard to keep that past at a distance. And so, when you return to the environment from which you came, which you left behind, you are somehow turning back upon yourself, returning to yourself, rediscovering an earlier self that has been both preserved and denied. Back to 2002. In the fall of 2002, I am attending grammar school. The school was founded in 1856 and has a school song in Latin. A few weeks after the start of the school year, somebody's father makes a telephone call to the mother of my classmate, Birgit. Birgit is my new best friend. This father has heard that Birgit is friends with me, and he's worried about it. He warns Birgit's mother. He says it would be better if Birgit would not associate with me. It would be even better if she would be friends with his daughter. In that same period, I realized that my t-shirts are too short. Other girls from my class wear a tank top underneath their shirt. Only my stomach is visible. My geography teacher points this out when he pulls my shirt down and says, I shouldn't be so naked in class. In Society as Verdict, in Dutch Het Vonnis van de Samenleving, Eribon emphasizes the role of the educational system as a tool that separates social classes. I quote, if there is one institution that recognizes, records, reinforces, and perpetuates the existence of social class, it's the school. The function of the educational system seems to be to preserve the social classes as they are, or rather, to preserve the distance between these classes as they develop. The hierarchies, categories, and power imbalances Eribon discusses in this work are too often seen as straightforward and definitive. It is seen as a fact of life that if you are born in Amsterdam Oud-Zuid, your parents are homeowners who read NRC, you will have a bright future ahead of you. Eribon introduces terminology that calls into question these existing hierarchical relationships. Instead of upper class, he writes ruling class. He speaks not just of inequality, but of domination. He calls the culture of the ruling class the legitimate culture, to make clear it's not the only one. He uses words like seem and appear, and by using this language, Eribon makes clear that what is often seen as a fixed reality is in fact a social construct. About language, when discussing social class in the Netherlands, expressions that reinforce these hierarchical relationships are often repeated. Je omhoog werken, je milieu ontstijgen, opklimmen. It is language that insinuates that social mobility is possible as long as you are particularly intelligent, talented, or skilled. And that is a comforting thought for, to use one of Eribon's terms, the ruling class. They do not have to engage in critical introspection. They can continue to believe that their own success is also a result of their own intelligence, their own talent, or their own skills, and has nothing to do with the right network, the right family, the acceptable accent, or the right cultural references. In L'insoumission à l'héritage, weerspannigheid als erfenis in het Nederlands, an essay collection about the work of Pierre Bourdieu, Eribon writes, and this is my last quote, "The world as it is carries with it the appearance of self-evidence, or to be more precise, the self-evidence with which the social world shows itself and is experienced is rarely called into question." Let's change that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a seat. Thank you so much for that introduction, and we will talk more soon.
Thank you.
But before we do, we will listen to Didier Eribon. I already introduced him briefly to you. He's known for his views on education, on social issues, on nationalism, poverty, whatnot, actually. Two of his books are here, Returning to Reims and The Verdict of Society. But those books are quite old already, and he has written many more books, among which a new book this year about the life of your mother, which is not translated to Dutch yet, but I hear that is in the making, so that's good news for us all.
September.
Next September. It's a scoop. So please, I will give you the floor.
Thank you. I'm sorry, as Sophie has just mentioned, these two books are not recent books for me because, of course, the process of translation takes time, and in the meanwhile, I published a few other books, and especially one which has been published 6 months ago about my mother, the life, old age, and death of a working class woman. But so I had for a few moments the idea to read something about, to say something today about this new book. But as it was advertised and announced, this event about the social classes, the last book is also about social classes, of course. And that tomorrow, as you know better than I do, you have an election here. I will draw from this book, Terroir nach Reims, sorry. It's not that easy. To try to reflect on the political situation, not in your country, because I don't know very well the situation in your country, but in mine and some other countries I know better, like, for example, Germany or Great Britain. But I guess, and I heard, that the situation here is not far from the situation in my country and in the other countries I mentioned. My book, Retour à Reims, Return to Reims, I will not say this title in Dutch, sorry. Returning to Reims was first and foremost a return to class, an effort to return to the idea of class at a time when thinking in terms of social classes had been all but erased from the French intellectual and political landscape. When I wrote Retour à Reims, it was with the intention of reintroducing the question of social class, or if you prefer, the question of social classes, into theoretical and political discussions. The notion of class had been evacuated from the intellectual landscape in France, but also in many other countries. This was partly due, of course, to the virtual disappearance of Marxism after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the subsequent collapse of the communist parties. But this erasure of the idea of social classes was also the result of a whole ideological process carried out by think tanks that presented themselves as wanting to renovate and modernize left-wing thinking, but in fact, which wanted to replace everything that defined left-wing thinking with everything that defined right-wing thinking. The notion of class, the notion of social determinism, and so on, was replaced by the idea of the autonomy of the subject as an individual, and therefore of individual responsibility. the European social democratic parties, and in particular the French Socialist Party and the German SPD, the Labour Party in Great Britain too, adopted this way of thinking by converting themselves to economic neoliberalism and rejecting, forgetting, or fighting everything that made the left the left. By undoing the idea of social class, the idea that there were a social conflict based on the existence of antagonistic classes, and by insisting on the autonomy, which meant, sorry, I added something, I cannot read it. By the autonomy and of individual responsible of themselves and of their situation, which meant that their situation were not linked to any social situation or class belonging. This social democratic thinking sought to redefine a form of governmentability in which the governors govern and the governed obey and remain silent. If there is no longer a possible we the workers, as opposed to them, the bosses, the exploiters, then there is no longer a possible self-representation as belonging to a mobilized group or potentially mobilizable collective group. But this collective, dissolved by the neoliberals' thinking of the social democratic parties, whose aim was to destroy any possibility for the dominating classes to say we, to mobilize, to think of themselves as a group with common interest, despite all the internal differentiation, in short, as a social class. This dissolved collective would very quickly, as we could sociologically foresee, reconstitute itself in another form, abandoned by the official and institutionalized left, Social Parti Socialiste in France, and even attacked by this left, which was implementing neoliberal reforms to dismantle public services and social protection. Individuals thus sent back to their isolation by these neoconservative discourses were going to reconstitute themselves as a class by voting for the far right-wing parties or for the right-wing or far right-wing parties. When you no longer feel represented by the party whose mission was to defend your interests and that have betrayed their historic mission, you stop, of course, voting for those parties and you vote for another party, or, as is very much the case with today's precarious working classes, especially the younger people in the precarious working classes, you don't vote at all. Voting for the National Front in France, for the far right wing, is largely a class vote. But this class no longer organizes itself as we, the workers, opposed to them, the bourgeoisie, the exploiters, the oppressors, but as we, the French, opposed to the immigrants and to them and to the globalized elites. There is still a them and a we, but the content and meaning of these categories have changed radically. If I announced these political upheavals in Retour à Reims in 2009, when this phenomenon was just beginning to emerge, it's not because I'm a prophet, of course. It's because I could see it happening in my own family. And that was one of the impetuses for writing my book, to understand how my parents, my family, who had always voted for the left-wing parties, who were loyal Communist Party voters, could have slipped into voting for the National Front. Today, whole regions that used to be the bastions, the strongholds of the left and the centers historical centers of the workers' movement have become bastion strongholds of the far right wing. Left-wing voters constituted themselves as a class by voting for the party that defined itself as the party of the working class. It was the Communist Party. Today, when I was a child or a teenager, today the children and grandchildren of those voters are constituting themselves as a mobilized class by voting for the far right. There are, of course, other factors to consider. The transformation of work, for example. In Retour à Reims, I tell the story of how my mother, after working as a cleaner, house cleaner for a long time, started working in a factory in the early 1970s. There were 1,700 workers there in that factory, both men and women. And 500 of these workers were members of the CGT Workers' Union, which was the union very closely linked to the Communist Party. And it was, of course, a major force of resistance. There were massive and long strikes. In 1978, a striking worker on strike, was killed by an employer's militia outside the factory gates. My mother took part in these strikes. She was part of the working class movement because she was participating in the strike called by the trade unions. Later, the factory closed, of course, like almost all the large factories in the region of Reims. The question is, what happened to the workers who could not find jobs, and to their children and grandchildren after them? They became unemployed. They were able to find only insecure, precarious jobs. Amazon warehouses replaced the big factories. And there are, in those warehouses, we all know, very few trade unions, and any form of protest or resistance is immediately put down. Here again, we've gone from being able to form a collective, a mobilized group, a social class, to a situation where workers stand side by side but can't form a collective, can't form a group, mobilized group. To use the language, the vocabulary of Jean-Paul Sartre, we have gone from a mobilized group, or at least a potentially mobilizable group, to seriality, what Sartre calls seriality, which means individual, being near one to each other, but not being able to being together, but being separated from all the others, and therefore a situation which demobilizes them and reduces them to powerlessness. Here again, voting remains the last means of reconstituting oneself as a political force, as a group that can protest collectively. And the way this force is able to protest is to vote for Marine Le Pen and his horrible candidates and his horrible candidates and a horrible party. There can, to see the working class people, to see my family, to vote for Marine Le Pen, you can imagine how painful it is for me. There can also be movements of collective mobilization, of course, in the streets, as we saw in France with the Yellow Vest movement, which is very difficult to describe politically, since it was born outside the parties, the political parties, and outside the trade unions, and whose discourse differed from one region to another. But in any case, whose force was such that the government and those in power violently repressed them. And as you know, several people were killed, about 40 people lost an eye, hundreds of demonstrators were seriously injured, mutilated for life, and thousands were imprisoned. This is the truth of Emmanuel Macron's regime, an authoritarian and violently repressive neoliberalism. It was a class mobilization, this movement of the Yellow Vest, to be sure, but one that did not correspond, of course, to the traditional or Marxist definition of the notion of a class movement, of a class struggle. And of course, we need to rework here the concept of class if we want to understand this new kind of social movement. There is a beautiful sentence by Pierre Bourdieu saying that we have to get rid of our concept of what is a social political movement, because not to get rid, but to keep in mind that if we do not recognize a movement as what we think a movement is or has to be, if we do not recognize the movement, we have to change our categories and not to dismiss that movement as not corresponding to what we have in mind. Because the Yellow Vest, so many people say it's not a working class movement, it's a right-wing movement, it's because we did not recognize this movement. But as Édouard Louis put it very clearly, when the Yellow Vests are insulted, I feel insulted myself because they insult my family, they insult my parents. I recognize my parents in those people who are demonstrating, who don't have the right vocabulary, who don't have the right behavior, but this is a working class movement, and I recognize my family in this movement. And we have that to keep that in mind. It's not because the movement is new that we can't support it. We have to support this movement. I did support it. It took time for me and Édouard Louis enlightened me when he wrote this piece. I recognized my parents in that Yellow Vest movement, and at that point we decided to support the movement in spite of things we did not like in it. If Retour Reims was an untimely intervention in the intellectual and political field to remind us of the importance of question of class and the need to return to them to define the left-wing thought and project today, I was surprised that it was read, for example, in Germany, as a denunciation of the place given to questions of gender, race, sexuality, and so on, to the detriment of question of class. When I looked at my personal background, and in particular my career as an author at the beginning of the book, I was led to reflect on the reason why I, who came from a working class background and was very familiar with the effects of social violence on the dominated classes, had never written about these realities, or only marginally. Why had my previous books focused mainly on gender issues, sexuality issues, and the gay question? I was analyzing modes of domination and resistance in the registers, the realms of gender and sexuality, but not in the register of social classes. I wrote that, in fact, the contemporary framework of politics had made these theoretical questions possible, but had made class-based questions virtually impossible. It was, of course, this book, an attempt to reflect on all the other modes of domination that Marxism and the Marxist tradition and a single interest in social class had excluded from political thought and theory. But in returning to the notion of class in Retour à Reims, I was not trying at all, of course, to go the other way and to exclude once again everything that the notion of class had previously excluded and that had to be constituted as crucial problems against the notion of class as the only one to be taken in account. I have stressed on several occasions that this reading, this German reading, Sarah Wagenknecht, for example, in the Parliament quoted my book in that sense, that this reading of my book was wrong. Moreover, this reading is explicitly contradicted in the book itself and in my subsequent books, where I insist on the importance of feminist movement, LGBT movement, anti-racist movement, along, of course, with a class-based movement. In my book that followed Retour à Reims in 2013, entitled La Société comme verdict, Society as verdict, I will not try to quote the Dutch title, I show how the social world is structured by a set of modes of domination and hierarchization that take hold of us from childhood and constitute us as what we are. Class domination is obviously very important, but it makes no sense to say that it is the only form of determinism and of domination. This intellectual or political bias is a legacy of Marxism that we need to overcome, or that it is the main form of domination. We could argue that the division of the social world are produced in part at least by discursive operations, what Pierre Bourdieu called the theory effect. We think they are classes in the political sense of the term, because Marx said there were classes, because Marx wrote that they were classes, so they were classes. It is a discursive implementation of a perception of the world that becomes the reality of the social world, with its institution, its organization, its theoretical and political elaboration. But unless we have an essentialist or substantialist conception of the social world, no division, no principle of division of the world, no perception of the world is more true than another. For example, Simone de Beauvoir poses the question at the very beginning of the second sex in 1949. Why is not there a women's movement? Just as there is a workers' movement or black movement in the United States, she asked, and these are the examples she uses. And we may well think that these are the examples that were obvious to her at the time she was writing. Why, the question she asked is, why don't women constitute themselves as a we the women, she asked. A we that would enable the women to become the subjects of their own discourse, and no longer the objects of men's discourse. So to challenge the inferior second status to which they are collectively assigned. The answer she gives may seem tautological. It is that women don't feel solidarity with each other insofar as they favor other links, other affiliations, other definition of themselves. Working class women feel more solidarity with working class men as members of the same working class than with women of other classes. Black women with black men than with white women, and so on. In this way, these established principles of division, class, race, and the solidarities they presuppose or entail, working class men and women together, black men and women together, are both vectors of struggles and also, at the same time, vectors for the maintenance, persistence of other forms of oppression, in this case, of women as a group by men as a group. She therefore proposes the introduction of another principle for dividing up the perception of the social world. Men and women. Women are a group, and they have to say we the women. A similar approach can be found in the long letter that the Caribbean Martinican poet Aimé Césaire sent to the General Secretary of the French Communist Party in 1956, announcing that he was leaving the party. He wanted the black people of Martinique to recognize themselves in a primordial bond of solidarity with black people of Africa and no longer with the European white working classes. The concept of negritude had to take precedence over that of proletariat. As Frantz Fanon would say before Césaire, as Frantz Fanon would say later, before Césaire, the people of Martinique did not see themselves as black. It was Césaire poetico-political affirmation that changed their perception of themselves. The idea of negritude was the basis of a new way of perceiving oneself collectively. We are black, we are, and our solidarity with African black people everywhere in the world, and especially with African people. The idea of negritude was criticized, of course, by Fanon himself, by Édouard Glissant, by Maryse Condé. So many people, black writers, wrote about this idea to criticize it. But it was, nevertheless, the foundation of a renewal of political categories. The problem, as we can see with Césaire, is that any movement, any principle of dividing up the world tends to want to impose itself as the fundamental principle. And that's why the notion of intersection, every movement, old or new, think that the principle of division, of perception of the world, it is based on, is not only the main one, but the only one, or the most fundamental one. And we see with Césaire saying the most important is black versus white, after having been a member of the Communist Party, or Simone de Beauvoir saying the most important divide of the world is women, who have to collectively organize to think of themselves as a we and a collective locutor of a political discourse. But this diversity of movements and principle of division of the social world implies, I believe, that there is no homogeneous political time. Each movement has its own claims and, of course, its own traditions, its own way of looking at and defining current events. Each movement has its own past and its own present, let's say its own temporality. This heterogeneity of political time means that there are several presents which do not necessarily overlap. There are several presents, and we cannot reconcile this present. There are moments where temporalities come together, when movements are articulated, often in conflict between each other. And a striking example was the moment of May 68 in France. I don't want to create a mythology of May 68, of course, but I do think that we can try to produce a new spirit of 68 or a concept of 68, which would help us to think of politics as a generalized critical activity that would be deployed in multiple fields, which would be a way of reconciling and the different temporalities which cannot overlap. That's why, and I end on this point, I do not subscribe to the construction of an idea of the people as opposed to the elite, the caste, and so on. The slogan, "We are the 99%, they are the 1%, is of course a wonderful one, a very efficient one, but it tends to mask the internal opposition within the 99%. If we erase the opposition between the right and the left, as happened, for example, in Spain with Podemos, in favor of the idea of the people against the caste, of the homeland or the nation against the international oligarchy, we leave aside fundamental question. For example, are these 99% of people all in favor of women's rights? I'm not quite sure. The right of abortion. Are they in favor of the rights of LGBT people? Are they in favor of the fundamental principle of anti-racism politics? No, of course not. And the idea of a nation, a homeland mobilized against the international oligarchy, seems to me to contain many nationalist danger. first of these dangers, the danger of nationalism, as we can see in so many countries today. I believe that the left is either internationalist or it is not the left. And I'm worried of notion, the people on the homeland versus the system or the caste, that can be exactly, word by word, identical to those used by the far right wing, even if, of course, the intentions are different and opposed. We cannot use the same vocabulary at the far right. It's too dangerous. We have to frame our own vocabulary. The notion of mobilized social class, therefore, seems to me to be essential, and yet it is necessary to return to it, to return to the notion of social class, of classes, and working class, provided we don't make it the sole and absolute principle of politics. The feminist movement, the LGBT movement, the anti-racist movement, the movement which struggle against the climate change, and so on, are all part of the fundamental principle that define the left, that define the oppositional politics today. I'm sorry, I'm so tired.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think you covered a lot of things in your lecture, and we will definitely come back to most of the points you made. But maybe to start with where you ended. If I understand correctly, you say that the things that we call maybe identity politics, we should not see that as a threat to the left. We should embrace it and see that we're all fighting for the same values in the end.
Yes, but it's the word, the notion of identity politics is tricky, because I think when the feminist movement does not claim a feminine identity, they fight for the women's rights, different ways of fighting, but it's not an identity. I know that some feminists in the 70s, especially in France, some writers, some theorists were advocating the idea of feminine specificity and so on. But it's part of the discussion. A writer I admire, who is Hélène Cixous, the great, one of the greatest writer, French writer today, contemporary writer, used to talk about the feminist writing, the feminine writing. There is a specificity of feminine writing. She was attacked about that, but the examples she gave of the really embodiment of the feminine writing was Jean Genet, which means that a concept of feminine writing, specifically feminine, was broader than simply applying to women. I never used the idea of identity politics, but it's not about identities. It's about oppression, domination, about insults, about inferiorization, about subjugation. So as a gay, I don't fight for gay identity. I fought for the right to be what I am. I wrote extensively about insult and the role that insult took in my life, and what it is to be insulted. From when you are a teenager, you hear an insult, faggot, and suddenly you come to realize that in this insult you hear every day in your own family. This insult is intended to you even before you knew that you were someone who were becoming gay. The insult precedes the identity. So it is not about the identity, personal identity. To be gay, it's about the inferiorization of gay people. So exactly the same for women, for non-white people in our countries, of course. And so we can think of building a left-wing movement if we do not take into account all these forms of domination, of inferiorization, of oppression. And the class, social class, is one of these forms of oppression, but it's not more important that to be black and being assaulted in the street because you're black, or being gay or lesbian and being assaulted in the street because you're gay or lesbian. So if I can use the word inclusive, the left has to be inclusive, to take into account all these movements. Is why I was referring to May 68. Of course, all these movements were together in the streets with all their differences, their internal conflicts, obviously. But the concept of May 68 is that people were criticizing the social order, the oppressive social order, and they were fighting together against the violence of this order. This is why I recognize myself in the movement of the Yellow Vest. You can imagine that they were, I'm very different of the people who were demonstrating, but suddenly, because people recognize themselves, something of themselves in this movement, you had queer activists, you had prominent members of a Green Party, you have anti-racist movement, which went one after one, after the other. We went to the demonstrations with the Yellow Vest to show solidarity and also to show that the issues that was raised by the Yellow Vest movement were shared differently, but shared by other people, other groups, especially all the groups, notably the anti-racist movement, if I can say, Black Lives Matter movement in France, to be subjected to police violence, such an incredible police violence. As you know, France is one of the most incredibly violent country if you think about the police repression of social movements. It's incredible. I'm sure you saw some images of that, but maybe the newspaper don't like to talk because they like so much Macron that Macron killed people and mutilate people. You don't read that in the newspapers, but he does, and he does day after day, month after month, year after year, and here there is a kind of this is the very basis of solidarity between different movements, that can be together to build a more democratic society.
When you listen to the speech of Didier Eribon and the remarks that he made, how do you feel that the Netherlands fits into this discussion?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Well, I mean, I do think that there is a similar history when it comes to left-wing parties and the rise of the far right. But on the other hand, I mean, I do think that France, it has a different relationship to class, because in the Netherlands, conversations about class are often held in terms of denial. They have been held for a very long time in terms of denial. Maybe now it's changed. Maybe, yeah. Okay, yeah. I don't know, but maybe that's changing a little bit right now. But I think for a very long time it was very normal to say in the Netherlands, I don't belong to any class, or we live in an egalitarian society, things like that. So I do feel that, I think the way I grew up was that these conversations were very normal to say, I don't belong to any class, or everyone is middle class, things like that. And I still feel that it's very prevalent, actually. I mean, now, of course, with the elections coming up, terms like bestaanszekerheid or kansenongelijkheid are used, but still it often seems in newspapers or talk shows that the question of class mainly pertains to working class people or people from a lower class, whereas the question of class is actually a question for everyone, of course, but the conversation is not, it's not really like that.
Not there yet.
No, I don't think so.
It's funny what you it's what you said, because when I'm in such different countries, when I gave talks about Retour à Reims, in every country there were people in the newspaper who told me, "Oh, this is probably true in France, but it is not true in our country. It's not true in Great Britain." I've been told that. Not in Great Britain, which is one of the most class-based society, even more than in France. And this denial you were mentioning is everywhere, in Germany, in Italy, in Greece. And in Germany, people told me that there is no such thing as classes in Germany. Even one sociologist told me, here in a public discussion, here in Germany, we do not have a tradition of thinking about class. I told her, have you heard about Karl Marx?
Do you have an explanation for this denial?
This is a denial. I don't have the explanation. It's because it has become to change. I will even praise myself and my work. It has become to change after the publication of Retour à Reims or Returning to Reims in different countries, because a lot of people say it's exactly that. I experience in my own life, as you say, and people were silenced. They did not dare to say, there is a link between class and shame. Mm-hmm. And people did not dare to say, I'm a working class child. My parents were very poor. I lived in a very destitute suburbs. We didn't have enough to eat every day, and so on. So the denial is here, and also because you don't have working class people in the media, in politics, exactly, in the newspapers, on the TV. The homogeneity of this class of journalists, of politicians, they go to the same school, they go to the same, they have the same professor, and they share the same ideology, and this ideology is an old Marxist, completely outdated theory that there are social classes. But if they are here in the position they have, it's because they are social classes, and because they are the privileged, on the privileged side of this class-based society, which they benefit and which other people do not benefit. And to say our school system is not based on social classes is such a lie. You can see it everywhere, in Germany, in France, in Great Britain, in Spain, in Greece, and I'm sure here in the Netherlands, in Sweden. We have, because we don't see the realities of this country. We see the movies. We see I saw recently a movie by the Swedish film director Thomas Wittenberg. The movie is called Submarino. And you see what is the reality of a city like Stockholm, with the working class part of Stockholm, which we never hear of, except in certainly a movie which intends to show it to you.
When did you first realize that you were part of a class?
I think when I went to high school. So yeah, that's also why I wrote this essay. The thing that I read was part of an essay that I wrote before. That's why I wrote this essay also about this age, because it's a transformative age for a lot of kids in the Netherlands, because you go to high school. And I think that, yeah, in the first year of my high school, somebody said to me, well, all this happened, but also somebody said to me, and he really, a classmate, so he was also 11 or 12 years old, and he didn't mean it like in a bad way or anything, but he said about me and my mom, "You are the poorest people I know," and I was like, well, okay, but also I knew a lot of people who I thought were poorer than I was.
You didn't see yourself that way?
No, I didn't see myself that way at all, actually, and then. Because all of a sudden I found myself in this entirely different context. Well, still I didn't really see myself that way. I did feel like, oh, I have different clothes from my classmates, and we have a smaller house and things like that. But still, I didn't really think of myself in terms of well, being poor. But then he said that, and then I still felt like, no, I'm not. I don't think I'm poor, but well. Maybe we were, but now I think differently about it. But he was right that we were, you know, my mom and I, we were the poorest people that he knew, because he just did not know a lot of people who did not look like him. Yeah. And well, to come back to what DJ was saying, and also your question of how come that people talk about class in terms of denial, it is because there are so many people who can deny it because they grow up in a certain environment and they remain in that environment for the rest of their lives, because the educational system is built that way, but also because they find a job somewhere and they see people who look like them, and then they grow old, and they, well, you know, on their entire lives they can lead without being too much confronted with
their position.
Yeah, with their own class position.
When Édouard Louis sent the manuscript of his first book, En finir avec Eddie Bellegueule, it has been translated into that, but I don't
Weg
know.
met Eddie Bellegueule.
And a French publisher sent him a letter saying, your novel, we cannot publish your novel, which is a pure fantasy. We know that such things you describe in your book don't exist. It was his life. So his own life, his own family was rejected by kind of French bourgeois in a major publishing house, saying it does not exist, which means you does not exist, and if you exist, we don't want to see you publicly. Remain hidden in your suburb or your provincial tiny towns. It's interesting to see that even in my new book, the last one, which will be published in Dutch in September, I have a chapter about language. The death of my mother completely cut me from hearing some way of speaking that was my mother's way of speaking, which means a working class way of speaking with the construction of a sentence, some vocabularies. And I even bought a dictionary written by a professor of linguistics at the University of Reims about the language of Champagne, which is the region in which Reims is located. And when reading this dictionary, it was like hearing my mother talking to me on the phone. It was her vocabulary and not mine. So I have to unlearn the language of my youth, which meant the language of my family, in order to become part of the milieu in which I live now. And you have to unlearn your language, your way of being, of thinking, of dressing, and so on. So, of course, there are classes. But if you don't know that there are people who don't speak like you speak, who don't dress like you dress, who don't behave, who don't think like you think, of course, there is an ethnocentrism of class by the bourgeoisie and especially by the cultural and intellectual bourgeoisie. And to say social classes exist, and you have to take them in account if you want these people to consider themselves as being part of the society in which we live. And if we don't do that, if they feel my mother ignored and despised by the society in which she was living before her death, of course she would vote for the National Front. I can understand that. It was the only way to protest and to have their voice heard.
You both write a lot about the split identity that you sort of adapt to, that you live in both worlds. How is that for you when you're returning home or when you're not home?
It depends who I am visiting. But, well, I am from Friesland, so I grew up with an accent, which was like half Frisian, half Leeuwarders. So I had to unlearn that when I moved to Amsterdam specifically. So I was 18 when I moved to Amsterdam, and then if I would sound too Frisian and also a bit too Leeuwarders, which is like you could hear that it's a bit of a how do you say, like ordinaire manier, like a
bit tacky, or
a bit tacky to say to have that accent. So I had to unlearn that, and then now when I go to the north, it kind of like comes back again sometimes. But that's fine, I think. But I mean, that's about the accent. For example, the way I dress and things like that. Yeah, that's in my family. No, it's not very much understood. There's a lot of jokes about it, but also because I'm gay, it's also like, oh well, that's also part of it. So you cannot really say that it has something to do with class, but also just with she went to a different world, and now this alien is coming back every now and then, and it's fine. And my grandmother tries to relate by saying that she read something in the newspaper about Amsterdam, for example, and then I appreciate that. But yeah, it's difficult to relate. Yeah, definitely.
To re-educate one's accent is something crucial in the process of change to move from a class social to another. Because if you keep your accent, people make fun of you. People made fun of me because of my northern accent when I arrived in Paris, and I have to unlearn my way of speaking, my accent, my vocabulary, some expressions I used to use, and to learn a new way of speaking, a new language. And before you said you did not consider yourself as poor. When my mother read Returning to Reims, she told me, I was infuriated reading your book because why? You said, you write, we were poor, but we were not that poor because we work hard. My father was a factory worker, and my mother was a house cleaner, a maid, and we worked hard in order to feed you, my brother and me, every day. Yes, this is what we call being poor, and for her it was kind of insult, and she would not recognize herself in the word poor. We were not beggars. It's like we were beggars. We were not beggars. I did not say that. I said we were poor. We were living in a kind of box of cement, in one room, and you say we were not poor. We do not have a lot of money, that much money, but we worked hard. Yeah, this is what I write about. People who work hard and who, in spite of that, are poor. And this is the point of my book. It was not to insult you. It was to protest against the situation which was made to you. And so people don't want to be described as poor. I realize that.
And I think also that writing about these things, it's often experienced by people, for example, from my neighborhood who read this essay, which is not a lot of people, but still a few read it. And they were also very insulted that I would write something like this. Whereas, I mean, I understand that it's not a fun read for nobody, but especially not for them. And also they still live there. So they feel like it's easy for me to say because I left. But for me, it is also something that I write because I want for them to live in a better situation. But they see it as an insult that I am too harsh about the neighborhood and that it wasn't that bad, and maybe some things happened, but also there were very nice people there. They try to, and I get it because they still live there, so they also have to come to terms with that fact, and they also sent their children to this school, so they also have to accept that and try to make it into a different story actually for themselves. So I think that writing about it in general brings with it a kind of antagonism with the people that you write about, even though it's not intended.
But it's also we have to understand that defending their sense of dignity,
yes, and pride,
and they don't want to be seen as the poor ones, the destitutes, the forgotten,
white trash,
and they want to be seen as people who work hard, who are proud of their work, and proud of what they consider of their dignity. It's to be entitled to be proud of themselves. And this I understand, and I saw that in my family when my book was published. It was a sense of kind of collective denial. Maybe one of my cousin, you say you were ashamed of your brother because when he became to be a butcher, and I'm myself a butcher, and I don't see the point of being ashamed of that. I say yes. I was describing my feeling when I was 14, and I did not say that it's shameful to be a butcher, to be someone who works in that kind of job, of profession. And I understood very well that people were resented my book as a kind of description of themselves, precisely the way they don't want to see themselves, of the lower part of the society.
Yeah. You both talk and write also about your sexuality and what role that played in transferring from one class to another. When you started to reinvent yourself, you first started writing on sexuality instead of class. Why was that?
Well, as I say in Retour à Reims, I'm a social miracle because I was doomed to be ejected by the school system because all my family, people in my family, did not reach the level of secondary education. And I survived this process of elimination of the children of the working class, which is statistically overwhelming. And I survived. And this miracle for me has a name, and the name is homosexuality. I have to differ, as I was different, as I have to differ more and more. And to be I was 14, 15, to become a young gay. The way to become a young gay, to give myself an identity, was to become someone who read books, novels, Marguerite Duras. To read Marguerite Duras was a way of saying I'm gay, then to read Simone de Beauvoir, to read Jean-Paul Sartre, to read Jean Genet, to read Michel Foucault, and so. And the miracle is, for me, has been homosexuality, because I did not belong to my milieu, which was very, very, very homophobic milieu. I have to dissociate myself from that milieu. And the way I found to dissociate myself from that milieu was to inventing myself as a young intellectual. It was a fantasy because I did not have money to go to the university, to write a PhD and so on. But it was the way I was trying to invent myself as gay before knowing that there were something which is now called the LGBT movement, which was not very important at that time. And for the young people, it's wonderful that there is a LGBT movement, and it will, which is very helpful, I know, to them, and books and so on. And homosexuality was the miracle. And when I started writing, my first book was a biography of Michel Foucault, because I knew Foucault, and I can say it's a gay book, because it's, of course, it's about Foucault's work, Foucault's philosophy, but the impulse of the beginning, the starting point of writing this book was share homosexuality, the complicity, which was based on a similar sexuality, the similar perception of the world, a similar experience of the violence of the social order, of the inferiorization, subjugation. So and then I wrote a book which is called Réflexions sur la question gay. It has been translated into English as Insult on the Making of the Gay Self. I did not choose the title, but the idea that the insult is at the ground of the construction of an identity in the beginning of yourself as gay is ground of the insult that you reappropriate, and you cannot get rid of the insult, because if you think that you can forget it, you go into the street and you faggot, as though it was an information given to me. And the insult is everywhere. What you can do is to reappropriate it and to reinvent you as what the insult says you are. The wonderful book by Jean-Paul Sartre about Jean Genet, Saint-Genet, comédien et martyr, the beginning, someone told him, you are a thief, and Jean Genet reflects, I will be the thief. You said, I am. And some people told me, you faggot, and I will be the faggot. You are telling me I will be, and that I'm already So I am this fagot. I will be the spokesperson of the fagots who cannot speak for themselves because they don't have access to the possibility of writing and publishing. So I wrote about homosexuality, sexuality, and I wrote a book on Jean Genet later, Une morale du minoritaire, a minoritarian ethics or moral, and it was because it was about it was transforming my personal experience into a theoretical elaboration and reflection. But also, as I said, it's probably because I wanted to dissociate myself from the working class I was raised into. I came from the working class I came from, and it was also a way of dissociate myself. To write about my own homosexuality was also a way of dissociate myself from that working class I tried to escape, and I did success in that way. In part of it, partly because I did not succeed completely because I had to come back to this retour à Reims, returning to Reims, which means that you never forget where you come from, and if you try to erase it to push that in the corner of your mind, suddenly, when my father died, I said, why did I never write about my working class background, about social classes? And it's of course because of my personal trajectory, but also because, as I try to say, because the theoretical and political landscape has changed to a point that the very idea of class has been erased, pushed away, dismissed as old-fashioned, and you have, as I had to fight to write about homosexuality, I had to fight again in another level to get back to social classes and to my social class.
And what role did it play for you in migrating classes?
Well, it's very different because I realized that I was gay when I was 27. So that's a total different stage of my life. But I think about that often because, in this essay, and I think that, I read the part where, that is also foregrounded, is that being a girl in this kind of environment is very specific. It's a very specific Venn diagram. So it's not just growing up in an unsafe environment that is quite violent, but also that has the potentially this threat of sexual violence in it as well. So sometimes I think, but I mean, I'm just like psychologist. I'm no psychologist, so I don't know. But sometimes I think that being so much. Being so focused on trying to see what your relationship is towards men or boys, kind of distracted me from my own sexuality. And also with, for example, these kinds of songs that my classmates sang about being homophile. I felt that that was not directed at me because men were gay and women were lesbians, but I mean nobody was talking about that. So it was not really being gay as a woman was just like something that was completely ignored. So but I mean it's easy to say now. I don't know why this took me a while, but I think it has something to do with that. that being a girl and growing up growing up as a girl in the neighborhood like this, it does not leave a lot of space for self-reflection and for experimenting in that kind of way. And I think also, by the way, that like these gender roles, I think that what you said about your homosexuality being a miracle, actually, I like that a lot, because I do think that in some way I always felt I am not a woman that can be a woman like I should be a woman in relation
like
to
the
a man.
archetype woman.
Yeah. So that I had felt that from a very young age already, that I was queer, but in like the old-fashioned sense of the word. That I was just a bit weird. I was a bit of a weird girl.
Bizarre.
Yeah. So
we are bizarre.
so I think that was also my way out of thinking like, oh, I cannot be a woman as what is
in the way
expected
that they
of
want
me.
from me. Yeah.
Yeah.
We will return to this conversation shortly, but first we will listen again to Meerte Labré reading another excerpt from Returning to Reims.
An interest in art is something that is learned. I learned it. It was part of my project of nearly complete self-re-education, necessary in order to move into a different world, a different class, and to put some distance between myself and the world and the class from which I came. An interest in artistic and literary objects always ends up contributing, whether or not it happens consciously, to a way of defining yourself as having more self-worth. It helps produce a differentiation from those who lack access to those same objects, or a distinction, in the sense of a gap between yourself and the others, those from an inferior or uncultured class. This distinction is constitutive of your sense of self and the way you look at yourself. On so many occasions throughout the rest of my life as a cultured individual, I've had the chance to observe while visiting an exhibition or attending a concert or an opera performance, to what an extent people who take part in high cultural practices seem to gain a sense of self-satisfaction from their participation in these activities. A feeling of superiority that can be read in the discreet smile that never leaves their lips, or in the way they hold themselves, the way they talk knowingly as connoisseurs, the way they display how at ease they are in these circumstances. All of these things are manners of expressing the social joy that results from corresponding to expectations, from belonging to the privileged world of those who can flatter themselves with appreciating refined forms of artistic expression. I was always intimidated by all of this. Yet I went on trying to resemble these people, to act as if I was born into the same world they were, to appear as relaxed as they were in aesthetic situations.
Thank you so much. We're going to talk a little bit about art, and I would love to invite Abdel Daoudi to the stage. Since 2021, he has been a permanent director of Toneelschuur Productions, and for his first directorial effort, he chose Antigone. And this season, he's directing The History of Violence, based on the book of Édouard Louis. Welcome. Give him a warm welcome, please.
A small correction. The direction of History of Violence I directed last year.
Oh, it already ended.
It already ended.
Oh, too soon.
Too soon. It has been back for the theater festival in last September. So we did the last performances in
the fall.
They just finished.
Why did you want to make a play about that book?
Reading Édouard Louis' work, it resonated with me because upon reading his words, I was, as I described sometimes, I felt myself seen, and even though he's telling a different story, I felt you're telling my story, and I finally found an intellectual writer, author who could elaborate on the culture that he brought up, was brought up in the north of France, and that resonated with my same culture and my same background I had growing up as an immigrant, feeling this split identity that I constantly feel in a big city, coming from a poor family, and he gives this lower class, or the working class people the same nuanced world and the same intellectual worlds that are usually gave to the higher class people, and that moved me a lot, and especially the book, The History of Violence. I felt such great power because we take a look at people and we deduce people easily to a class or to a migrant or to a victim, and and if there's one person who is allowed to deduce his own victor that he is assaulted by, is Édouard Louis, but still he managed to go above that situation with an unseen radical empathy, taking a look to the bigger, more violent constructions that are the reason why these violences happen in the world. So.
Yeah. You said that our society is structured in a way that certain bodies are more important than other bodies. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that?
I will. Let me maybe start by an example. As an immigrant body in this society, I always felt and always still feel a gaze, and that has a gaze towards me, and that puts me in a corner that I might be or perceived violent. I have to, and I always knew that, that this is my role in this society. But for example, 2 years ago, just when I was doing the preparation of this of the adaptation and the work on history of violence, I was in an accident. I was hit by. I was driving on a scooter towards a meeting, and I was hit by a car, causing a major accident, and that car drove off. That was the first thing that happened. So I felt then there, laying there on the streets, that apparently my body is not worth it enough to check if I was okay, if I was severely injured, or to give a glance. And secondly, when the police arrived to check me, because they were somebody called the police, and they were the first on the stage because I was sitting on the curb. I felt that, first of all, the officer there didn't seem, he found it not necessary to call an ambulance, because I was also saying, I'm okay, I think I'm okay, and I don't think I'm bruised. I'm afraid, a little bit afraid for my foot, but I tried to stand up, and I said, I think I'm okay, completely filled with adrenaline. And he was more busy with taking notes, and he had his 2 interns teaching how to deal with this kind of situation. And I ended up taking up my scooter and walking, strumpling back home to my wife, who opened the door for me and was in awe, and said, we have to go to the hospital immediately. And only upon arrival in the hospital, by the reaction of the first aid medics there and how they treated my body, like what happened? You were in an accident. How fast were you driving? Was it a car? And I was immediately rushed into this emergency room, completely checked if I had some internal bleedings. And so this situation affected me in a way that later on I thought that was the first time, not only that I knew that my body is a different, is worth differently in this, but I also felt and experienced and internalized it. So that's. So.
And how do you take that experience with you?
Oh, good question. Try to make art. Try to make art out of it. But how do I take that with me?
I think it's interesting because you, in an interview, you said you are now in your year of violence because you're only making plays about violence. Mm-hmm. Why does that interest you so much?
I would say it's a language I understand. It's sitting here and hearing talk about social class and class migration. There is so much violence in the way we treat each other. For example, one of the first times that I had an interview and I was talking about coming from a social class and also recognizing the stories of being poor and talking about it. There is so much shame in, as you mentioned before. There is so much shame that is put on people from lower class that really feels as a violent gaze and as a violent, and we do that to each other. So the violence is in my work more than just the physical violence and the physical abuse, but it translates to the racial violence, class violence, and we in my life I've tried to escape that a lot, growing up in this city, having a more similar experience as Fien. My parents wanted me to go to secondary school in a suburb in The Hague, of where I live. That's called Voorburg, and they only wanted me to go there because that was perceived as a very good school, taking me away from the poor neighborhoods that we live in, and the poor primary school that I was in. And coming there at this school was a huge culture shock, because for me that was also my first experience with knowing, oh, this is how poor we are, and this is how different I am, and I tried to change myself and try to fit myself in this category. I started loving hockey, which I never played, and frankly, I really don't understand. And trying to create an image of myself by erasing what I was, and that creating like a self-hatred that I look now back on as really violent, and so by choosing these subjects to tell these stories about violence and focusing in my work on social violence and the violence we inflict on ourselves is a way for me to express myself.
Yeah, I think, and now you make art out of all your experiences, and you use that to make art. Do you ever have the feeling that the people you make the art for are people from a totally different background, or that they are maybe more elitist? And what do you think about the paradox that's there?
Yeah, I have great difficulty with that. There is a big paradox. I find it very difficult because me being here, sitting here now, talking about art, making art, I often feel that I occupy this space still temporary. It feels that any moment now, this space can be taken away. Can be taken away from me.
And I think you are both also artists in a way. You're a writer. You also write books. Your books also have been turned into plays. Do you feel that same discomfort?
With the public, or with feeling like you don't belong?
Both, with the public and also with maybe not belonging.
Well, I mean, I don't really feel like I belong, but I also don't feel like I don't feel like an imposter syndrome or anything like that. No, I do feel like I've got something to say and I'm saying it. So, so I don't really feel that, but I do understand your, feeling ill at ease with talking about class. For example, today I thought, I'm going to the Balie, and often when I go to the Balie, there are not many people here who share the same background as I do. And I think tonight that will probably be different because you know that Didier Eribon is coming, so you often that already says something about what kind of people will show up. But in general, yes, of course, the Dutch literary world is very, very small, and there are not many people that have a similar background to me, and also readers in general, maybe also don't have that, but I do hope that the few readers who do, that they find my work.
Yeah,
so and you never really know, you know, like I can say all kinds of generalized things about the general Balie public, but on the other hand, I don't know. I just
you never really know.
Yeah, you never really know. So I try to think of it, of it as positively as I can.
I think you also wrote about that there could be an exotism of the working class, or that they are sometimes romanticized. How do you make sure that doesn't happen, or how do you find that sweet spot?
Well, I never experienced this imposter syndrome either, but I was very pretentious when I was 20 or 25. I thought of myself as someone very smart, who will do great things. But I had the idea that all this could be temporary, because I do not have the material means to make a living, to be able to be a writer, so I experienced that idea, that feeling that that can stop one day or another, and the feeling of not being illegitimate, but being always threatened by the violence of the social order, in which you created a place for you, which this social order did not give you. You have to struggle for build that place for you. Annie Ernaux, recently in an interview, the interviewer said, "You said once that you do not feel legitimate." Oh yes, I said that once, but now there are so many people who are saying and repeating that I'm not legitimate. I see that the Nobel Prize Committee consider that I'm legitimate, so I let the other people say that I'm not, and I consider myself as enough legitimate to be awarded the Nobel Prize. So it's very good. You will see that what you consider as temporary, when time will pass, you will consider that you were as legitimate and belonging to the place you built for yourself as the other people who are not more legitimate than you. And so don't worry about that. Your position is not temporary.
That's great.
That's great. Like Annie Ernaux, you can see if people consider you are an artist worth being invited to create plays, and so on, it means that you are as legitimate as the other ones. It's very, but who is in the audience? When Retour à Reims was adapted on stage by Thomas Ostermeyer, the director of the Schaubühne in Berlin, he asked me I was in Berlin to attend some rehearsals, and he asked me to have a dialogue with him for the program, for the premiere, and we had a discussion to be published in the program. And one of his questions was, how do you think that we can have working class people on stage and working class people in the audience? And I think that it will be easier to have working class people on stage than to have working class people in the audience, because you can ask working class people to come to perform, but you cannot change the structural situation of art and artistic system in our societies, and the audience of theaters or not to mention concerts, music hall, opera houses. The audience obviously are not working class audiences, and even when it's a show adapted from a book about working class, or my book, or Édouard Louis' book, or other writers, Annie Ernaux' book, the audience is the average, in terms of social classes, average audience, which means bourgeoisie, cultural bourgeoisie, and sometimes students who are not very often from working class extraction, because only those who have been socialized with, who inherit what Pierre Bourdieu called capital culturel, cultural capital. It's not only economic capital, it's also to have been raised in a milieu in which to go to the theater, to the movies, to the concert, and so is to read books is obvious. It's part of your mind, of your body. You are someone who know about theaters, about music, about novels, about literature, and so. You cannot change that. There were some social experiences about if some museum decided that entrance will be free on that day, or that week, or for unemployed and so on. You can see that the social profiles of people who show up to the museum on the day in which it's free is exactly the same. It's not because it's not because it's too expensive that people don't come to visit the museum. At the Paris Opera, they tried an experience to attract a younger audience, and they're kind of avant-premiere for people under 28. The seats are 10 euros. 10 euros. Even the best seat, 10 euros instead of 200. And a friend of mine who worked at the Paris Opera told me it's even more socially closed than the regular performances, because only the children of the bourgeoisie know about these opportunities, and it's more socially upper class than the regular performances. So it's not because it's of course you can working class people cannot afford a ticket at 200 euros, but there are also tickets are 40 or 15 euros, and when it's 10 euros, only the children, because when you are a worker in a factory, when you are someone who works as in an Amazon warehouse, you don't go to the opera at night because it's not because you don't like, it's because you don't know how to do. You're
tired, maybe.
Of course, you're tired. Have you seen that wonderful movie by Ken Loach, which is called Sorry We Missed You? The woman is someone who works with the elderly at home, and the man, it's a couple. The man is a deliverer for Amazon, and delivery man, and you see how incredibly exhausting this kind of work. are, and upsetting, destroying the feeling of people, the possibility of living together because they are arguing constantly because they are too tired. And even working that hard, they cannot. It's not enough to live comfortably. And it's a wonderful movie. I love Ken Loach's movie, of course, but it's a kind of upsetting movie too. And this is the new working class. As I said, my mother used to work in a huge factory. It was a very, very hard job that she had in that factory, the noise, the heat, and so on. But there was a trade union. They were organized. They were fighting for their rights and for their salaries, for their conditions of work. And if you are someone who has to go half an hour, then to help to work with an elderly who cannot move, stand up, and so. And your husband is going to deliver parcels. If there is a traffic, if there is a traffic jam, he is going to lose his payment. And this is a new working class, and we have to consider that when we are discussing freedom lecture, there are people who do not have the freedom to attend lectures, but also to go to the movie. They don't even have the energy to watch TV when they are back home at night. So we have to take that in account when we discuss what is culture, what is art. We have to take in account that I go to the movie, I go to the concert, I go to the museum. Of course. So I'm not saying we must do that, but we have to think what is the social role of these habits, artistic, cultural habits. It's a way of implementing class differences, class hierarchies, and that I know that very well, but I do not have any answer to how to change that.
I think we're almost drawing to a close, but I want to end with one last question for my Dutch speakers here tonight, because as already mentioned, we have national elections tomorrow coming up, and I think the theme of poverty or the gap between rich and poor, or as we call it in Dutch now, bestaanszekerheid, which is a new word, has never been so popular among all parties. Is that going to make a difference that this theme is on the map now?
Can you translate the
bestaanszekerheid?
Yeah, I don't know.
Precarity.
Precarity.
I would say. Yeah, it's a term that is used by politicians in very, very different ways. I think also because it's quite a vague term, it's quite easy to just make something out of it that suits your own political ideas. So when the VVD is talking about precarity, it's a very different story than when the Partij van de Arbeid is talking about it. So I don't really think that because people are using this word or using the word kansenongelijkheid, which is inequality of opportunities, that it really means that it really means something. Yeah, of course, for some politicians it does, because they've been, working on this theme for years and years and years. But for most of them, I think it's just a trend.
What do you think?
I also don't think that this will change anything, because already now in most of the debates and how the politicians use the word bestaanszekerheid, it tends to focus on we need to create houses, and we need to bring the number of migration down, and often misusing the word migration and asylum. So the word bestaanszekerheid is already, even before they have the chance to implement legislation to create this bestaanszekerheid, it's already misused. So I have very little faith that this will get better in the short term.
Yeah. We will not end on a positive note then. But maybe I will look at the audience and see if there are maybe one or two questions that we can close off with. Or maybe someone wants to just say something, that's also allowed. Oh, yeah, here on the front. Marijn will come to you.
Monsieur Eribon, could you tell me a bit about your relationship with Édouard Louis, your influence on him, and what you think about his books?
His books are wonderful. He's a great writer. I can say that because I do think that, but it's I'm not the only one who says so. It's his books are acclaimed worldwide. In the US, in Japan, in Latin America, and I know here in the Netherlands. My relationship to him, actually, it's very personal, but there is no secret, so I can answer your question. He was my student, and when he was a student at the university, he came to. He tells this story in his last book, Changer Méthode. It has been translated. Yeah, change in French is change method. I don't know if the title is the same. He tells the story. I gave a lecture at the University of Amiens when Returning to Reims was just published. I have been invited by my colleagues of the Department of Political Science, and I gave a lecture. It was supposed to be a seminar, but as it was announced on Facebook by some professors, it was a whole amphitheater with 200 or 300 people. And among those people, there was this young guy who was 18, not even 18 at that time. He came after the lecture. There were several people who came to talk to me, to ask me questions. There was this young guy who came to talk to me. I read your book. I would like to talk to you. Can I write to you to ask you questions? Of course, I gave him my email address, and he wrote to me. And we as easily as it seems now, completely incredible, impossible, unthinkable, but we became friends in spite of the age difference. Yet let's use the right word, the age difference, and we became friends, and he started writing his first novel, En finir avec Eddie Bellegueule, and when he started to write it, I assumed that it would be kind of Retour à Reims, a sociological work. And when I read it, when he gave me the manuscript, I realized that it was, he chose to write in the field of literature and not of sociology. So I didn't want to interfere. I read the book, and it was fine for me that he wanted to do something completely different, which I understand very well, because I assume he didn't want people would say, "Oh, it's kind of Eribon's disciple, and it's a new Retour à Reims," and so on. So and his book was so. When the book was published, he asked me, "Do you think that my book will be successful?" I said, "Oh, yeah, it will be. But you have to know that." for first novel, you will sell 3,000 copies, and if it's a bestseller, 5,000. And if you're very lucky, it will be 8,000 copies. It was what the book sold in 2 days, and it sold 300,000 copies in 3 months. So I was very happy with that, and then he became one of the most respected, acclaimed French writer in France and in the world. So and we are still very close friends. If you read French, Geoffroy de la Gannerie has just published a book which is called about our friendship, which is called Three. Geoffroy, Édouard, and me, and it's a reflection about friendship. What is it to build a life grounded on friendship instead of entering the institution of the couple, the marriage, the children, and so on. And we could say it's because we are gay, but a lot of gay people today can marry, can raise children, and we decided not to do that because Geoffroy is my partner, and we live. It's the title of an essay by Foucault, which is called L'amitié comme mode de vie, friendship as a way of life, and what it is to think about. The possibilities of ways of life outside of the normative institutions, and it's very, very, very interesting book, a philosophical reflection on friendship, discussing Adorno, Foucault, Roland Barthes, Monique Wittig, and so on, Jacques Derrida, and it's very, very interesting book about more than it's interesting about friendship. And if you read French, it has been translated into German last week. It was released in German, so if you read French or German, you can read it. The title is Three.
Okay, thank you so much. That's a very good tip, and I think we will be especially looking forward to the Dutch translation of your latest book. We have to wait a little less than a year, but it will get here eventually. I want to thank all of you for keeping it up with us and listening so carefully. And thank you so much, Meerte Labré, Fien Veldman, and Abdel Dawidi, and of course, Didier Eribon. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.